Other events. There are a number of other events and situations which are noteworthy, but which for whatever reason have not led to a full Wind of Fortune in their own right. Briar prejudice. Synod judgments have rebuked citizens for their prejudice against briars and encouraged greater acceptance. Over 383YE, the growing threat posed by the heirs of Turuniel and the cultists of Yornagra caused long-standing prejudice regarding the place of the briars in the Empire to bloom. Those questions were answered with emphatic responses by the Imperial Synod. The greater majority supported a statement by Josephine of Edina's charge, openly rebuking those citizens who judge briars for what they are rather than what they do, and citing the lack of pride of those who act in that way. There were related statements of principle passed in the General, the Highborn and the Marcher assemblies by Friar Jack Reed, Tabris, son of Armisael, and Mel Bleak of the Marchers. The clarity and forcefulness of the Synod statements have decisively settled the questions that were being asked about briars. There's been no requirement for mandates, as the strong leadership in the Synod has been sufficient to address concerns. The prejudice that was openly growing has now abated, and in some cases the response has gone further. Some citizens have taken the words of the Synod to heart and are now openly questioning long-standing prejudice, not just against briars, but also against imperial orcs. There's no conflict over the issue at this time. That's been settled by the Synod statements, but more than a few citizens have personally resolved to treat briars and imperial orcs with more pride. Game information. If you want your character to have been influenced by the statements of the Synod, then you're free to do so. Any character who wishes to put aside any prejudice that's outlined in the brief for their nation in favour of treating the lineaged and the orcs on the basis of what they do rather than who they are, they're free to do so. This includes, but isn't limited to, the burial traditions of the Marchers and the Navarre concerns about briar susceptibility to the Valorn miasma. We're going to update the lineage and species pages to reflect these changing attitudes once we've had an opportunity to consult more widely on the potential impact of the evolving world. Flowering briars. Flowers are now an additional trapping for briars. During the autumn equinox, several briar-lineaged citizens exposed to the Valorn and the followers of Yornagra began developing an additional trapping, blooms and flowers growing from their bark. There was some concern that these flowers represented some kind of invasive mind control targeting the briars, but further studies have shown that this was predicated on a misunderstanding. It appears the flowers were related to some kind of curse inflicted by Yornagra, but fears of briars falling under the control of the Spring Eternal seem to have resulted from a rumour mill run amok. That curse now appears to have run its course. Briars are no longer experiencing the strange, peculiar dreams associated with the flowers, nor experiencing the burst of vitality and health that accompanied them. However, more than a few briars have found that the flowers continue to grow, and while the flowers may have begun in Broceliande, they've also begun to appear on briars who've never been there. Examination shows them to be entirely natural and not a cause for concern. Divination repeatedly proves that any lingering curse or connection the flowers once had with Yornagra is now ended. Game information. We've added the option to include flowers and blossoms as part of the trapping for briars. There's nothing sinister about this. The worry that the flowers were somehow controlling the briars was based on a miscommunication. There's no particular role-playing effects associated with the flowers. We'd initially offered additional briefing to player character briars who might have been receptive to the approaches of the heirs of Turuniel, but we've taken that plot in a different direction. Anyone who's emailed in has already been made aware of those changes. The late Empress. At the urging of the Synod, the virtuous have engaged in a pilgrimage of devotion. Pilgrimage means that mandates won't require a greater majority to be enacted despite opposition from the Sword Scholars and the Wisdom Assembly. During the autumn equinox, the General Assembly enacted a mandate raised by Genevieve Brossa di Tassato, urging imperial citizens to undertake a pilgrimage of devotion and revelation. As detailed in Crowned in Rose and Heather, this means that mandates enacted during the winter solstice won't need a greater majority, regardless of how the conflict between the General Assembly, the Wisdom Assembly, and the Urizen Sword Scholars turns out. And you can read about that in The Price of Wisdom. In addition, there was an opportunity for the General Assembly to determine a greatest achievement for the Empress. Despite several such statements being raised, all were withdrawn, and instead, the Assembly of the Nine declared her greatest achievement to be acting as a patron of others. While the statement's been widely circulated, it's not had the impact that a statement from the General Assembly would have had, and so has not led to any additional opportunities. Raiding in the marches. There's no sign of the winter-touched Feni who attacked the Singing Caves. The Marcher National Assembly voiced concerns during the autumn equinox regarding an attack on the Singing Caves that took place during the summer solstice. There have been no further attacks and no further sightings of the raiders. Walter of Conksbury, a thresher from Sarkham, had spent some time searching for clues and has come to the conclusion that the raiders were none other than the Feni of Alderley, who accepted the offer of vengeance from Agrement. The signs suggest that Imperial heroes who went through the Sentinel Gate during the summer solstice defeated the entire band, although whether that'll be the end of them, or not, is anyone's guess. Life and death can be tricky where a creature like Agrement is involved. For the moment, however, there's been no sign that they're still active in the Empire. Liathaven. Liathaven is still under the effect of Wither the Seed. Verlornspawn run rampant in the territory. As detailed in the Winds of War, the heirs of Turuniel were unchallenged in Liathaven and have presumably completed their schemes there. The withering curse of winter magic still lies across Liathaven, and there's no sign that Yhornegrah or her servants have taken any steps to remove that curse. Despite the curse, the heirs, the spawn of the Valorn, and the servants of Yhornegrah have run rampant here during the last few months. There's been no contact with either the Feni settlers nor whatever Jotun forces still notionally remain in the territory. It's not clear how well they've weathered the violence there. There are very few Navarre left in the territory. Indeed, we assume only one player character steading still exists there. Players are free to roleplay the details as they wish, but their steadings will have experienced savage, if sporadic, attacks since the autumn equinox. A further 10 thrones each season will be diverted from the Imperial Treasury to support those Imperial citizens still in Liathaven. Every forest, farm, herb garden, business, congregation, mine and manor site in the territory will suffer a rank 1 penalty for the next year. Worse, Verlornspawn have infested the territory and will represent a significant threat to any military force that enters the territory until they are dealt with. While there's no danger of the Valorn itself spreading, the Verlornspawn will need to be dealt with in the event the Empire returns to liberate the beleaguered territory. The Wither the Seed Wind of Fortune discusses an offer made by the Eternal Kayla to the Navarre that has a particular bearing on the future of Liathaven. Thule Slave Repatriation. The Thule have released almost all their remaining Imperial slaves. In the last month before the winter solstice, a large number of human slaves were brought over the border with Okkodov and released into Imperial hands. They're split into 3 sizable groups, one each delivered to Skarsind, Mikarova and Iversgard in Karsk. As with previous groups, they have few possessions, and the Thule do not hang around once they've been delivered. Rak, who speaks for the Dragons Undivided, announces from the embassy that this represents all the remaining Imperial citizens, or close descendants of the same, who've been held by the Northern Orcs. They also include 20 Navarre artisans taken during the Thule conquest of Traji in Herkinia. The Navarre artisans speak of being held in the far north, in echoing vaults beneath an active volcano, where they were forced to work tirelessly creating magic items for use by the Thule warlocks and warriors. They weren't particularly mistreated as long as they cooperated, but they have no love for their captors. They confirm that there are perhaps a dozen artisans left in the hands of the Thule, all of them winterfolk. All of this is apparently in accord with the Sungold Treaty, ratified by the Imperial Senate during the summer solstice. There's still some minor wrangling regarding the status of Sungold Pass itself, in that the Thule think it's in Okadov and the Empire think it's in the Empire, but ceded it to the Thule. But this appears to be little more than bickering at this time. The former slaves have been welcomed back into their nations, and those who had lived their whole lives among the Thule have been given the test of citizenship and embraced by the egregores of the nations they feel the closest affiliation to. Zealous Crusade. The Highborn armies can now take the Crusade order. Last season, Abel of the Shattered Tower enacted a mandate to encourage the Highborn armies to embrace their destiny. As a consequence, each of the 3 armies of Highguard can now take the Crusade attacking order.